Good afternoon or good morning, and welcome to the National Newspaper Publishers Association, Black Press USA's Fire broadcast. This morning, we have the privilege of having Spencer Crew, who is the Clarence J. Robinson Professor of African American, and Public History at George Mason University, and he's also the interim director of the great Smithsonian National Museum of African American History and Culture. We also joined by our president and CEO, Dr. Benjamin Chavis. Gentlemen, welcome.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Brother Cruz, good to see you, and congratulations on your new appointment, and certainly for all the great work that you've contributed over the years to preserving the history of African Americans.
Well, thank you very much. It's an honor and a privilege to be here. It's good to see you again as well.
Yeah, and Dr. Crew, you a lot's going on at the museum, even during the pandemic. And let's start there, because how has things changed at the museum during this pandemic?
Well, I think the biggest challenge that we faced is that where a museum is closed. So we've not allowed visitors to come into the museum. So it's caused us to sort of reorient our direction. And we focused a lot more of our activities online and virtually. So if you go to our website, and if you're a member, you will see a lot more activity on our website and other offerings that people can turn to as a way of continuing to get information, continuing to make a connection with the museum, despite the fact that our doors are closed.
Yeah, and with that, I know that some new initiatives have gone on. The pandemic hasn't stopped you guys from moving forward. Case in point, the National Air and Space Museum, there's a partnership there. Can you tell us a little bit more about that?
Yes, an exciting partnership with him. Victor Glover is an African-American astronaut who's up in space. And what we did was to create a partnership between ourselves and the National Air and Space Museum to remain a continuous connection with astronaut Glover while he's in space. We will have a chat back and forth while he's in space. And during the time that he's there, we'll have broadcasts over time in order to share his thoughts and his experiences, but also to encourage young students, people of color, to think about the sciences as a direction in which they can focus their attention and maybe find careers. He's a wonderful example of what can happen in terms of focusing on STEM and science-oriented education.
Absolutely, that sounds exciting. And so, yeah, and speak about it, because I think that STEM, we all would probably agree how important STEM is, especially in the African American communities. So please expound.
Well, I think the key here is that if we look at where opportunities will arise as we go into the future, that more and more things related to science and to electronics will become more and more important in our society. Look at where we are now. We are doing more things virtually than we ever did before. So what's necessary are to have people who have the skill sets and the training to continue to move us in that direction, but who can find employment there. So what we're really trying to encourage young people to think about is science as a field, as a direction in which they can go, in which there's a future for it. But also we need to have our presence in those activities to make sure that the orientation, the concerns, the issues that are raised are issues that also concern our community.
Yeah. And you're filling, at least on the interim basis, some huge shoes. And Dr. Lonnie Bunch, tell us how has the transition been going? Nothing like what's going on at the White House, I'm sure, but can you tell us a little bit about the transition there and how that's been? Again, that's some big shoes to fill.
Well, it's been, I think, a fairly smooth transition. What's important to recognize is that when Lonnie was made the secretary of the Smithsonian, he asked me to come and do that. He asked me in part because he and I have been friends for a long time, probably more than 30 years. And we have worked together on a variety of things, and he understood my experience. Before I came to the museum, I had actually been the director of the National Museum of American History for almost 10 years. So there was not a role that I had not taken before. And we talked a bit about that transition, and I think it's gone well. The wonderful thing is that what Lonnie had done in advance was to create an institution, an organization that was, I think, had the highest standards of operation. He had a very well-trained professional staff who were dedicated to that museum and its excellence. So my task was just to continue that pathway and to ensure that I think the example he'd set, the direction he'd set for the museum continued to go forward. And it's been, I think, a fairly smooth process because the staff has been terrific. Probably the biggest challenge has been the fact that the arrival of the pandemic has changed some of our operating procedure. So the key there had been to help people make that transition and to get used to working at home on computers rather than coming to the office every day. But people seem to have made that adjustment fairly well.
Yeah, that's great to hear. I know that our president and CEO, Dr. Chavis, he had a great interview with Lonnie Bunch before Dr. Bunch moved over to the other position. Dr. Chavis, I know there's a lot of things that you wanted to talk to Dr. Crew about.
Yes.
So go right ahead.
Well, first, I just wanted to again note during the live stream our appreciation of Dr. Crew's his own history, his own leadership. And of course, Dr. Bunch made this appointment because of, not only is the transition going well, but I think it was always expected to go well because Dr. Crew, like Dr. Bunch, represent a generation of intellectual giants, not only to record and capture the history of our people, but to be able to communicate and distribute those images and those forms and those lessons, those truths to millions of people, not only to Black people. I think one of the most significant things about the African American Museum is it's attracted people from all races, all cultures, and people, and I'm certain that will continue. But my question is, Dr. Crew, is that in the virtuality, we with the National Newspaper Publishers Association, we also, everybody's affected by the pandemic, so we are changing our infrastructure, how we communicate. Even the people who advertise with us are doing it differently. So the point is, we would like to be a helping hand to you and the museum, Dr. Crew, in helping to better inform, yes, the African American community, but all Americans of how they can access the value and the substance and the excellence of the museum virtually. I think a lot of people may still not know how to connect and how to get the benefit of having an interface with the museum.
Well, I think the most straightforward way to do it is we're part of the Smithsonian Institution, and the access to our museum is at the National Museum of African American History and Culture .edu, and that will get you at si.edu, and that will get you to our website. And on that website, you will find a wide array of programs, activities, interactions for people to learn more about what we're doing, but also for us to give things to parents, to teachers who have children at home and who they're trying to, I think, share new information with. And
yes,
what we've done is work to make sure that a lot of the things that you can see in the museum, if you came to visit physically, you can find quite a bit of those things online. Plus, we've created some new things. We've done collecting in terms of the area of social justice and equity to reflect the activism that's gone on in this country over the last several months. And we also have created a page where people can talk about their thoughts around those activities and also how they've been affected by the pandemic. Because as we know, our African American community and communities, I think, at risk, have suffered much more greatly under the pandemic than other communities. So we've tried to find ways in which people can sort of share their experiences through images, through writing, through different ways in which they can feel part of a larger community and not alone and isolated, which is the worry you have sometimes, is that people feel like they're suffering this all by themselves. And we want to try to create a community connection for all people who are in the middle of this, so they can find that what they're going through is not singular, but is part of a larger set of experiences that people are having.
Very good. That's very good news, and look forward to helping spread the word of the access.
Good. We appreciate that very much.
Yeah, and you mentioned too, we talked a little bit about what's going on with Victor Glover, the astronaut, as a new initiative. What else can people expect? We all look forward to being able to meet again, being able to go back to the museum. What can we all expect when those doors open again?
Well, I think what you'll find is that the experience continues to be, I think, a very powerful one, a very effective one in terms of how it strikes people when they come in. Hopefully what they'll find is that we have some changing exhibition that's opening. We hope to open an exhibition on Reconstruction, the period of Reconstruction in the history of the country, next September, and we'll be working on that up until that time. And what we're excited about that exhibition is that it talks about the connection of the past to the present. One of the things that's always important to us as a museum is not only to talk about what's happened in the past, but to use it to give us a sense of what we're experiencing in present day and what the roots of that are. And when we talk about Reconstruction, there are important things that happened during that time period, like the passage of the 13th, the 14th, and the 15th Amendment. 13th end slavery, the 14th grants citizenship to all people, and the 15th Amendment is the right to vote to African-American men and men all over the country. And what we understand is that these issues of citizenship, the issues of voting rights, and who gets to vote continue to be critical issues in our nation today. So we want people to understand that there is a long sort of bridge between the two that remind us how important it is to stay the course when it comes to these issues, that when you win a victory initially, you also have to continue to struggle to make sure that it doesn't disappear later.
Yeah, absolutely. And, we know that there was so much enthusiasm prior to and certainly after. You couldn't get a ticket, right? You had to wait. Do you, even despite the pandemic, what's your feedback, Dr. Crew? Is that enthusiasm still there for the museum?
Absolutely. I think a good indication of it is that our membership program is the largest membership program in the Smithsonian. And our members continue to stay connected to us. We get correspondence back and forth. And that's why we have so much programming, as a way of maintaining that enthusiasm and helping people to feel connected continuously to the museum and to our programming, and to do programs that resonate for them. That's why we did the program about the impact of the pandemic on the African-American community, because that's something of interest to them. And while we've done programs about the social justice movements that are taking place around the country as well. All these are issues that are vital to our membership, and we want to make sure that we are trying to get our hands on the latest information that we can share back with them.
Yeah. And one of the things too, you talked about social justice, but another issue that greatly impacts the African-American community is that environmental justice. And Dr. Chavis actually has always fought for that. What can you tell us that the museum might be doing in terms of environmental justice?
Well, what we're trying to do as part of the larger Smithsonian, especially working with our Natural History Museum, where the scientists are, they're looking at those issues. And what we look to do is to do things in collaboration with them to help us talk more about that, and how in our own communities, how that environmental impact hits us in different kinds of ways. I mean, Flint, Michigan's that great example. And all of a sudden you can't get water. And that has to do with the environment. So we want people to understand that this is an issue that all of us have to worry about and think about for the future, and try to commit ourselves to helping us slow the process of degradation in the environment that's happening.
Well, we have some material that I'll get to you
Okay.
from Warren County, North Carolina, where the environmental justice movement started. We have actual some video and photographs that we need to kind of get to you.
Okay.
It shows how this movement now that's started in a little predominant Black community in Warren County, North Carolina, it's a global movement. The movement for environmental justice, challenging environmental racism, challenging environmental inequities. Again, it's amazing how what Black people initiate inures benefit to all people, all Americans, but to all people around the world. Our outcry for justice and fairness and equality has a positive impact across all of humanity.
Absolutely. And Dr. Crew, the National Newspaper Publishers Association is currently engaged in a public education awareness program. How active is the museum with local or national school systems? And are there active classroom-centric programs?
Oh, yes. Well, our education division has been operating for a long time. Even 10 years before we opened our doors, they were doing workshops and creating programs for teachers to use in the classroom. What we understood is that, especially when teachers were looking at issues around race or African-American history, that they didn't feel like they had adequate information, adequate sort of, I think, chances to discuss how to best share that information. And we've been doing that for quite a few years. Our educators are very interesting and well-trained individuals. We have probably one of the few early childhood programs around African American history, around issues of race in the country. Our middle school educator is just as talented. And what we've tried to do is to make sure that we have information and education for all ages, not only just for the adults who come or the high schoolers, but also for the younger people as well. Because part of what we believe is that if you can get children to feel comfortable with diversity at an early age, as they grow up, they will have that comfort as they go into the world. And it may help us begin to see each other as individuals rather than sort of making that quick first judgment by what we see initially.
Yeah, that's it's vitally important as we see at a time where, we are talking about social justice, environmental justice. We're talking, obviously that includes the social justice part, what's been going on this year, Breonna Taylor, George Floyd. So the importance of educating, I guess one of the foundations of the museum has been educating on Black history.
Yes.
In addition to what you just stated, what else can we expect from the museum going forward to further educate, not just, as Dr. Chavis said, not just our community, but the world abroad?
Well, part of what we've always believed as a museum, sort of one of our mantras is that African American history is American history, that they're so intertwined that you can't pull them apart. So what we've also always wanted to do was to offer a sense of American history with an African American lens. And I think we've done that very successfully in the museum, and we try to do the same thing in terms of the activities we put online available to the public. And as you said, and Dr. Chavis has said, it's not just for the African American community, it's for all visitors to have a chance to get a different perspective on the growth and development of this country, and to begin to see who are the wide variety of individuals from a variety of communities who've contributed to make this country have the kind of prominence that it does and the kind of history that it does. And the more we understand that, the more that we embrace the fact that lots of different people have added to the history of this country, and that recognizing social justice doesn't mean you're taking away something from everywhere else. You're actually enriching the entire community, the entire nation. So that has always been our focal point, and that's the kind of thing I think you'll continue to see us do online, and then as we reopen to continue work in that direction.
Yeah, excellent. And I know, again, going back to prior to and during the time of opening, grand opening, a lot of donations were coming in. How is that going today? I'm not actually to be specific, but are there you still feeling that sense of we want to give to this museum, we want to enhance it?
Oh, absolutely. Part of it has to do, again, with the social justice activism that has occurred over the last several months. And I think it's really been a watershed moment, I think, in the history of our country, as you begin to see a wider variety of businesses and others really wanting to take a closer look at how they operate, a closer look at how they are looking at diversity within themselves, how they're looking at issues of race within themselves. They're also looking at trying to find avenues through which they can make a difference in the society and make a contribution that can help the society grow in a better direction. And a number of businesses have looked to us, among others, places to help us in the work that we're doing. I mean, one of the, I think, important things that we did early on in the summer was to create a portal page, a web page called Talking About Race. And the core of that experience was to take the 10 years worth of workshops that our educators had done with educators and to put that online to make it available to a much wider public. And in the course of creating that, what we did was to create sort of the steps that people can follow from different points of view. So there's a line for educators. There's a line for caregivers and parents. There's another direction you can go for people who just are interested in the issues of race and equity so that they can have these conversations, think about these issues in substantial kinds of ways. And what's embedded in that are workshop guidelines. There are, we look at African American history in that context. So you can see the connection over time. But also we have TED Talks by experts in the areas and videos and a wide variety of tools that people can use to have these conversations, with the goal being that we are trying to get more and more people to look at this issue of social justice equity and race in our nation, and to really have that conversation so that this watershed moment doesn't come and go, becomes a pathway to a better future.
Yeah. Dr. Chavis?
Yes. This is a plug. What happened is Stacy Brown and I have been working on a book, Dr. Crew, for last several years about the 500-year history of the transatlantic slave trade.
Gotcha.
And I know there was a lot of focus last year on the 400-year anniversary, but we wanted to take a wider view of not only what happened in America, but what happened around the world in terms of the transatlantic slave trade. And when I first went to the museum, when it first opened, it was breathtaking. I stayed in the basement. I couldn't even get up to the upper level because of the impact. And I just think that one of the reasons why we have a racial divide in America is because our country has avoided, even denied its history in terms of the impact of the transatlantic slave trade. So we're going to be in touch with you on it, but can you share also not only now that things are being more virtual, I'm almost certain that African people around the world, people of African descent around the world, would also enjoy having interconnectivity with the museum here in the United States.
Well, it's interesting that you bring that up. One, I think you're absolutely right that we haven't really, as a nation, confronted the whole issue of the slave trade, of slavery. But I'd also argue that what people try to do is say, well, slavery was a long time ago. What does that have to do with me? But the reality is that at the end of slavery, what you have is the creation of a system of segregation and discrimination, Jim Crow laws. And that's just slavery under a different name, which has continued well into the 20th century, into the 21st century. So I think you're right that what people need to understand is there is a long history of these issues that people have to think about. But with regard to the slave trade, we have actually an activity in the museum that's called essentially the Slave Rex Project. And it emerged out of work that the museum had done on the African continent with a number of different nations, but particularly with South Africa, where we found the wreck of a slave ship that we were able to extract some of the pieces from it and bring it to the museum. But out of that grew a program in which we are working with universities and museums and other organizations around the world to begin to look at the widespread impact of the slave trade, as you've said, and to begin to create liaisons and we hope maybe a major conference, but also maybe a traveling exhibition that will go to different parts of the world, and we'll talk about how the slave trade impacted that location, that nation at a certain period in time. So we begin to understand, as I'm sure will happen in your book, that people will begin to recognize how widespread the slave trade was and how much it impacted so much of the economy, so much of the development of so many nations worldwide.
Well, again, we're talking with Dr. Spencer Crew, the interim director of the Smithsonian National Museum of African American History and Culture. Spencer Crew, Dr. Spencer Crew, we are so appreciative of you taking this time out this morning. You mentioned you and Dr. Chavis talked at length now about the slave trade and the basement. And like Dr. Chavis, many found it hard to come out of that basement. But other exhibits, so what have the other exhibits, what do you find, how popular or which other exhibits prove to be as popular? What are you finding?
Well, I mean, I tell people when they ask me that, it's like asking me which of my children do I like best. I can't do that. But I will say that I think there are parts of the museum that have resonated tremendously for people. One place in particular I know where we have people lining up is in our one of our history galleries. We have the casket that belonged to Emmett Till. And I think for a lot of our visitors, the connection to that and to Trayvon Martin, people begin to see the connection over time. And that becomes a very powerful experience for our visitors to come in and to learn that story and that history, but then to actually see the casket in which he was buried and to really understand the impact that his funeral and his mother's bravery had on the civil rights movement and civil rights activism in the country. So I think that's a very impactful space of the museum. But it is important to recognize that while we have history galleries on the lower levels, we also have a gallery on community and a gallery on culture on the second, on third and fourth level. So those are filled with exhibitions that begin to look at the issues of African-American impacts on culture, African-American impact on the art, African-American impact on music, but also on African-Americans in the military. And we have, I think, a really interesting exhibition on African-American in sports. And what's different about that is not just a exhibition that highlights the athletic, I think, achievements of these individuals, but it also looks at the impact that athletes have had on the social system, on issues of race, on issues of equity in the nation, going back to Jackie Robinson and others, but then coming to the present, looking at what the athletes have done over the last several months in terms of demanding that the society not go back to business as usual, but begins to look more deeply at what's at the base of this social activism in the streets, and the need for organizations and corporations and owners to begin to take concrete steps to try to make a difference.
Yeah, outstanding. And you're right. What we saw this summer particularly with the NBA players and some Major League Baseball players, and the NFL, what they did the opening week too. I would imagine that is something that the museum will want to capture for future visitors.
Oh, absolutely, we've done collecting that way. And I will say too, the WNBA was really powerful on this.
Yes,
NBA was with the women, as often is the case for our community, were very strong about these issues, and I think stood up and spoke very resolutely about the need to think about changes.
Yeah, I'm glad you mentioned that too, because the WNBA has been as active and proactive as anybody else. You had athletes who actually left the sport for a while to take care of social justice issues.
Absolutely.
So yeah, they've been really at the forefront. Mm-hmm. So we have to certainly, the Black women always seem to lead. The women in general, right?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
So, Dr. Crew, again, it's been nothing short of a privilege. We hope to get this privilege again with you and others at the museum, because we think that it's, and I know Dr. Chavis doesn't mind me saying, we think that the museum is such a vital part of what we are looking at in our community, what we are covering in the Black press. And certainly we want to talk to newsmakers like yourself, educators like yourself. Dr. Chavis, I'm going to leave you with the last word.
Well, thank you very much. And like I said, this is an ongoing dialogue,
yes,
Dr. Crew. And just when you get a chance, express to all of your staff and the leaders over there our appreciation of what you do. The Black press this year is 193 years old. Mm-hmm. Since 1827, the Black press in America, since Freedom's Journal was first published.
Freedom's Journal, right.
We've been on the front line, not only reporting the news, but we've become an advocate for racial justice, for social justice, for equality, and for pushing the nation to, as President Obama would say, strive to a more perfect union.
Yes.
And now we're witnessing the hands that once picked cotton are now picking presidents, particularly in
wonderful,
Georgia.
Right.
And this election coming up on January the 5th is going to be telling whether or not the Senate is going to be in a new direction or in the same old direction.
Right.
So there's a lot at stake, and of course, visiting the museum, we get a sense of not only the price that we got that we had to pay to get the right to vote, but how the exercising of that privilege and that responsibility to vote is well documented. So thank you so much on behalf of the Black press. We look forward to continuing to work with you.
Thank you. I appreciate the opportunity, and we look forward to working with you as well.
Yeah, and just Dr. Chavis gave us a great segue, because this afternoon at 4:00, please tune in. That Senate race is very important. We have Reverend Raphael Warnock, who is one of the candidates that's running for the Senate in that runoff that's going to happen in Georgia in January. We'll have him at 4. And tomorrow, speaking of museums and Hall of Fames, we have an all-star cast at noon. LL Cool J, Russell Simmons, Chuck D, you name them, they may be here. We're going to talk about the the hip hop museum, actually, hip hop museum that's being built in the Bronx in New York, where it all started. So join us at 4:00 today for Raphael Warnock. And then tomorrow, the hip hop legends will join us, starring LL Cool J. And then at 4 o'clock tomorrow, basketball legend Isaiah Thomas, right here on Fire, NMPA and the Black Press USA. Thank you so much, Dr. Crew. We really appreciate it. Keep up the great work. Everybody stay safe.
All right, exactly. Thank you. All right, good to see you.